Hey, it's Inve. I'm here with a relatively quick guide on how to build and play some meta builds in the game. This is going to be the first in a series of guides that go over some of the better builds in the game that are more common to give new players better standing and hopefully get them out of their story mode ACs. Because, well, I'm sure that your whatever color glint is the best. It's probably got a Gatling on it, and those don't really work very well in PvP. If that comment was a little too close to home, just know it's not just you. Moving on, we're going to get into the assembly menu. So this is the build that I used to show off in the original movement video I did a little bit ago. If you haven't seen that, it'll be linked in the description and at the end of this one. But we have made a couple of modifications to it to make it a little bit statistically better, and we're going to go over why exactly these parts were picked and how to play this build a little bit at the end. So first off, we have our head. The 047 AN02 is one of the better heads in the game. Some would say the best. I'm personally biased. I think it looks cool, and I use it all the time. The reason that everybody uses it, though, other than its debatable looks, is mainly the extremely high camera functionality stat. Camera functionality is a modifier for your FCS's lock-on stat that allows you to lock on from further away than you normally would be able to. There's a formula for this that I will put on screen now and a little bit later when we're talking about the FCS. So moving on from that and its awesome camera functionality stat, which is the main reason, we also have a pretty good system recovery stat, which doesn't come up all that often, but if someone's PA bombing you, it will let you get back into the fight a little bit more quickly than some other heads. It barely matters though. It's really just the camera functionality. Core-wise, we are going for Akazar core. This core is mostly picked because of its really good defensive stats. With those in mind, we end up being able to take a lot of hits for the weight class that we're in. This core is, in my opinion, slightly overstated for its weight, and that's why it's heavily used. It also has really good stability, which will allow you to fire weapons like sniper cannons and grenade launchers while airborne without being stunned. Arms-wise, we are using the 063 and 03 arms. These are very firmly meta parts. All of these that we're using, by the way, if you couldn't tell. These arms are awesome because of their great maneuverability stat and the fact that their energy weapon skill is neutral. So if you have a weapon that uses the energy weapon skill, you can still use these arms with it and not have to deal with the downside of Talus's arms' poor maneuverability. It is not necessarily a upgrade from the Talus arms for energy weapon skills. It's more of like a side pick. For the legs, we're using the Aaliyah legs. They are really, really good, and debate on how they're pronounced will probably be in the comments. I don't really give a shit. But the reason they're really good is just they have awesome stats. The stats on these legs are some of the best just in general in the game. The turning ability is great, the stability is solid, and it's got good AP and defense. The load is not necessarily the greatest, so we are using some lighter weapons, but it's pretty awesome. Still, they're great legs. FCS wise, we are using FS Judith. This is a great close range FCS that a lot of people will pick over the default of Hogire for its better radar refresh rate. However, it's a little bit less good at all-arounding than Hogire. If you're building a new build and you aren't totally sure how to pick a FCS, Hogire will probably work for you. A lot of people might see the lock distance number is higher on the Hogire part and immediately think, well, I should just grab that. It's an all-arounder and it's got higher lock distance. It's automatically better. Like I said, you do have the small downside of the radar issues, but in this case, lock speed is a little bit less significant than you would, lock distance is a little bit less significant than you would initially think, because that 900 is multiplied by your camera with the formula that's on screen now. While the Hogire will still have a longer range than Judith after that formula is applied, those ranges are both long enough where you'll be within effective range of your weapons for the entire time, with both FCSs. Generator-wise, we're using Sombrero. If you have been playing this game for a second, you might have noticed that Sombrero's energy output is bonkers. It is absolutely nuts. The next closest comparison would probably be the Elia generator, which weighs 2,800 and still has worse energy output than the Sombrero. In this game, output is kind of the king of stats. Energy capacity, while good, doesn't matter as much, because if you can't output enough to keep up with your capacity, then you'll just get kind of stuck on the ground and very grenade vulnerable position. So we pick Sombrero because the energy output is best in the game and the weight is also best in the game. This generator is kind of like the only generator for most people. This generator here, Linston, is also a very good option. It has much better KP output, which allows you to regen primal armor much faster, but it is a little bit heavier and it does have worse energy output. For lights and mids though, these two generators are pretty much your options. You don't really want to touch the other generators that much. Booster wise, we're going for Virtue. It is very fast forward. If you find that you're having trouble going up and down against opponents while using this build, another alternative is the Elia main booster. This booster is also quite fast forward, but it goes up. It's not as fast forward in exchange for that though. So I personally think that we are better off using Virtue, because if you can deal with that decreased vertical thrust, then you'll be just a lot faster overall. And we also have the ability to tune our vertical thrust to make it better, which we'll talk about a little bit later on. Back booster is Latona. This is very standard. It is a very low impact, low energy consumption part that we can use to regenerate energy while in the air. If you just kind of hold back on your controller and float on your back booster, you will slowly regenerate energy with this generator setup. As for side boosters, we're using Shadar. This is kind of the default side booster for a lot of people. Some don't like its relatively low quick boost duration, and so they use Latona side. However, Latona side is a little bit slower and a little bit more draining. But only a little bit. It's still quite good. I use Latona side a lot, but personally for this build we'll be sticking with Shadar. Overed booster, we use KB Judith for 99.99% of builds that don't have a PA bomb. If you push triangle in PvP, it's kind of a death sentence. So if you're not aware, Overed boost uses your primal armor to boost, and if you have no primal armor in PvP, you have no health left. So we're just using the overbooster that consumes the least energy passively and is the lightest, because we're never going to push this button. For our rifle, we're using the 063 AN/AR. This is probably one of the better rifles in the game for consistency. Another rifle that you can use if you would like to is the Mr. R102. This rifle has a little bit higher overall DPS, a little bit higher ammo, but it's not as consistent as the 063 AN/AR. There is a third option in the back of the room at the 051 ANNR. This guy um, is cool. I like this rifle. It does high single shot damage, but doesn't fire anywhere near as fast as the other two rifles that we looked at a second ago. Any of these three rifles will be good, but probably the technical best is the 063 ANAR. Mr. 102 is real cool though. This is a cool gun. I like this one. As far as our left hand goes, the Motor Cobra. This is going to be on about 80% of builds. It's just really good. It has range that's pretty excessive for a machine gun. And it just does great damage. It's just kind of like best in class. It's a very, very good gun. You will see this gun a lot, and you will use this gun a lot. It's maybe like the mascot of FA, I would say almost. As far as our back weapons go, we're going to be pairing our Motor Cobra with a Travers. This thing is great. It's a grenade launcher. It does a large amount of damage. Other awesome grenade launcher, the Sapla, is another viable option if you really want to shave weight off of this build, but I would suggest sticking with the Travers because it has 18 shots versus the Sapla's 6. Both grenade launchers are phenomenal though. Grenades are very, very good in this game. The other grenade launchers are a little bit interesting. I don't necessarily recommend them because they're very heavy. They can be situationally used, as with most things in this game. For our missiles, we're using the MP203. These missiles are challenging to dodge. They do great damage, and they are super annoying. You'll also probably see these a lot. They're just great. The arc that they fly in makes them phenomenal and makes them also quite challenging to flare if they're fired too close to enemies. For our shoulder extensions, we're using the 061 ANRMs. These are kind of the only shoulder extensions in the game. Not really, but kind of. When you're using missile extensions, one big issue is you run out of ammo with them quite quickly. These ones have very good ammo capacity, and they move in an arc that's complementary to the MP203, and they do good damage, which makes them a great option. The Musking Gumo, which I recently learned to pronounce, is situationally useful with large missiles if you want to hide a large missile in a swarm of small missiles, but for most use cases it's not great. If you find that you can't dodge missiles and you're just getting shredded by your buddies who are just using MP203s and spread extensions on you, flares, these are great. You want to use the Goyen Dodes because they shoot upwards, and yeah, you want the missiles to go up and away from you. In our case though, we're going to be sticking with the relation missiles. That pretty much covers the frame and weapons of this. Up next, we're going to move on to tuning. Okay, so tuning. This is kind of a complex portion of the game, so this explanation might take a second. First things first, we're going to talk about our load tuning. It's exactly where it is right now because if we go any less, we'll be overweight. With load tuning, you want to be at the exact mark and you don't want to put in any extra. In Armored Core 4, it was different, where load tuning will give you extra stats. The higher you've got it tuned, or the more underweight you are. So that was something, alright. In this game though, you just want to tune it exactly to where you need it. And you can tell by our average speed right there. So for us it's 12 to 1-4. Energy output is one of the best stats in the game to tune, if not the best stat in the game to tune, because it is the thing that you need to move. Always tune this first. Another amazing stat to tune is turning ability. If you only get 2 bars to tune, you want output and turning ability, assuming you aren't overweight. Energy capacity is a good tune, but it's less of a priority than you would expect. Energy capacity is a trap for a lot of new players because they think, well, I'm not going to use all of that. You probably are going to use all of that, no matter how big the pool is, so it's much more important to focus on output. Energy capacity is usually one of the last things you tune. Maneuverability is an amazing tune because it maneuvers your arms, and you need your arms to be pointing at the things you want to shoot for bullets to hit them. So you pretty much always want this stat tuned up. Energy weapons skill, if you're using energy weapons, you want to tune this. In our case, we don't have any energy weapons. As far as the acquisition section goes, lock speed is going to be a must for most people, and missile lock speed is good for if you have missiles. Generally, you want to be at or around 200 lock speed, so that is about where we are right now. This is a lower priority since we only really have one rack of missiles that we're going to be dropping, so this is where the remaining points when I was done tuning everything else went, which is why it's half tuned as opposed to everything else. As far as boost goes, we tune our vertical thrust because the Virtue main booster doesn't have amazing vertical thrust, despite being very, very fast, so this tuning will let us get off the ground better and move up and down faster, which is very important. If you're using Aaliyah main, you may not want to tune vertical thrust, you may want to put it into horizontal thrust, but that is kind of a personal preference thing, and I do suggest using Virtue main, because going fast forward it's good, man. As for special boost, quick boost is pretty much always going to be tuned on your main booster, and so is quick boost on your side booster. You quick boost forward and sideways a lot. That's also why we don't really put any boost tunes in the other horizontal thrust portions up here, is because most of your movement is going to be quick boosting in this game. As far as our back booster though, we don't put tuning points in there because with this build we won't be quick boosting backwards very often. Control wise, once again, turning ability. If you have a weapon that can self-stun you, like a sniper cannon or a grenade launcher, you'll need to potentially tune stability if you don't meet the breakpoint under stability. However, in our case, since we're using a core with good stability and legs with good stability, we don't need to put any tuning points into here to avoid being self-stunned. That pretty much covers the tuning section of the build. From here I'm going to move on to gameplay. There are also stabilizers, but unless you know what you're doing, I would suggest just leaving them alone, because it's a lot easier to mess up how your AC feels than it is to apply good stabilizers without guidance. But yeah, again, that aside, we're going to move on to the AC test to get a brief description of how you should play this build, and then I'll show you a little bit of footage of me fighting the test dummy to give you a visual example. So the first thing you're going to want to do anytime you're using this build is pop your missiles up and open your missile extensions. On regular B, which I suggest you use, the controls for that are going to be X and then B. You can tell your missile extensions are on because the little flaps at the front open up. They only fire when your missiles are actually firing. So now that we have our missiles on and our missile extensions on, and we have our shoulder missile up, I can talk about cross wielding. So in this game there is a stat called parallel processing. It only comes into effect when you're using both of your arms at the same time. So to avoid that, we do something called cross wielding, where we'll use one back weapon and one arm weapon at the same time. Since we're doing that, we can get away with a lot more, basically, and we can kind of just ignore that stat. This build relies heavily on that. You usually only want to use each side in pairs, so when you want to go to switch weapons, it's probably best to just press both switch buttons at the same time. Be careful though, if you're firing when you do it, you might drop your weapon. Now since I've explained how to kind of orient yourself in how you should be firing, we're going to move on to fighting our lovely volunteer Kasumi here. So once again, going to open up my missile pods and then pop the missiles up, and we're just going to immediately start spamming missiles and rifle shots from a distance. Kasumi is going to be kind of a mediocre test dummy because she's not great at dodging missiles, but a real player probably would have deployed some missile countermeasures by now. In the event that your missiles aren't working or you run out of missiles, you want to purge your MP203s and your shoulder extensions. And to purge your shoulder extensions, you hold both switch buttons and then press B. But the reason you want to do that pretty immediately at the start of a match, as opposed to holding on to him until you're entirely out, is because the MP203 drains a lot of energy. And your other weapons are awesome. So on the other side of this build, after using your missiles up or dropping them because your opponent has a good counter, you'll be swapping sides to the Motor Cobra and Travers. This combo is super deadly. In this game, enemy primal armor is very thick, so you'll need to shred it off before doing any damage with a big damage weapon. The Motor Cobra is your main tool for PA shred, and you're going to be using it probably within 200 to 300 meters on an enemy. Most of the time you don't want to fire on the enemy until their PA is in the red. You can see on the enemy test dummy here, their PA is directly above the lock with in that little white box that's refilling. Again though, you just want to shred that bar down super hard, and once it's running low, you'll hit them with a grenade. Grenades work best in PvP against grounded targets. The netcode in this game is not very good, so while it might look like your grenade hits an airborne target on your screen, it won't necessarily hit on theirs. That brings up another very great thing to mention. In this game, because of its netcode and how it works, shooting at people outside of around 500 meters is not super possible. They have enough time to dodge the projectile on their screen, but visually on your screen you'll look like you're hitting them, and it'll probably lead to some frustration. So remember, if you're firing, stay within 500 meters. And this goes for almost all weapons. I think the only exception might be railguns because of their exceptional projectile velocity. Even then though, staying within 500 or 600 meters is probably still a good idea just for your hit registration. This build's optimal fighting ranges are somewhere between 300 and 400 meters. However, if your opponent is running something like a machine gun, you'll probably need to drop your missiles pretty early or back off to fire your rifle from a distance so you don't have your missiles blow up in your face, which is one of the main weaknesses of this build. Anyway, I think that pretty much covers it. If this helped you, please leave a sub. I know I didn't used to say that, but it seems like it's working because I've gotten a lot of fucking subscribers in the last week. Hope to see you guys in the Discord so you can finally 1v1 me.